Back-to-back days with U.S. overtime winners. Quinn Hughes for the men in the quarterfinals. And then, of course, Megan Keller yesterday afternoon, beating Canada in the gold medal game with an incredible move. They win gold, and now the men's team moves on to play Slovakia in the semifinals. That's today at 3:10. We mentioned this earlier, but if you missed it, there was one change made to Tage Thompson's line. Although they had played together a little bit last game, Jack Hughes is going to be playing on that wing, which I think has been the best line mate that line has seen, with Dylan Larkin on it as well. 803-0550 is the phone number if you want to get some calls in as we bring in Patrick Bacon from HockeyStats.com. Now on the West Her hotline, runs that site with Jay Fresh Hockey, co-founded it. It's a great site for all things NHL and also Olympics too. Patrick, not everybody's doing Olympic stuff, and I feel like your site's done a great job. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. I think when you're, we launched, it was advancedhockeystats.com about a year ago when we launched, and we bought hockeystats.com domain and set that up about 3 months ago. And so we are the little guy compared to Money Puck and even compared to Natural Stat Trick when you look at website traffic. And so when you're the little guy, you gotta punch above your weight. And so we really wanted to stand out and kind of make a name for ourselves with the Olympics. And it's been a challenge, but it's been a ton of fun as well.
Yeah. So, of course, we're into the semifinals. Listen, 2 days in a row with overtime winners for the U.S. I'm not sure today will be the case. I want to get some Sabres with you, too. But just how heavy a favorite would you consider the U.S. to be today? And how much more of a favorite than what Canada will be facing?
Yeah. So when I look at the website, right, I look at my own projection model. U.S. is at 89% probability. Canada is at 69%. So I think that if I'm to say between the two teams, right, just thinking about this logically, forget about models, just think about kind of consensus here. USA and Canada, they're fairly close to one another, right? Canada is probably generally considered a little bit better, but USA is playing against a team with 4 NHL forwards in Slovakia, right? And when you look at that Slovakia team, these aren't star NHL forwards, right? This is USA-Slovakia, who's solid, a solid probably middle six, maybe top line option, top six, maybe top line option, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's Dalibor Dvorsky, Martin Pospisil, and Pavel Regenda. Right, I know Regenda from my Sharks was on waivers, and the other two Slovakian forwards are pretty new. On defense, they've got Chernak, Martin Fehervari, and Simon Nemec, and that's it as far as NHL players. So they really are a strong underdog here compared to Finland is full of NHL players, right? I think Finland is just understandably a much more likely team to pull off the upset than Slovakia, even if Canada is slightly better than the USA.
Patrick Bacon, HockeyStats.com on the West Her hotline. How do you think the U.S. has played relative to what their expectations were and what their roster is? I guess are you seeing them dominate? It's only 4 games, but dominate as much as you feel like they should be?
Yeah, watching the game against Sweden, I honestly, I think at points there I kind of spaced out because it felt like the Swedes really were not getting much. Even when it was 0-0, I felt like the U.S. was just in control of that game. And I went into that game thinking that Sweden had a pretty good chance there and that they were pretty closely matched. But I felt like U.S. really dominated that game. When you look at the stats, U.S. was up 26-11 in slot shots and 14-3 in inner slot shots. So from the numbers, the U.S. dominated. And watching that game, I really felt like Sweden did not get much until they had to make that late push, which we often see in games. And then once Sweden made that late push, they tied the game and then it goes into overtime. It was all USA in overtime. Now, USA, they haven't really been tested, right? They've got to play Latvia and Denmark and Germany, not the toughest opposition. But even still, until Sweden, right? But I think the USA has played very well. They've played like a top team that has a shot at Canada. They've been very dominant.
Would they still, I mean, you kind of said this earlier, I think, with the way your model looks, that they right now look like what? How much do I want to go here? A lot lesser of a team than Canada, a little lesser of a team, or even kind of co-favorites, which is where we were kind of heading going into the tournament if they were to play head-to-head, which I still think we still kind of expect to happen here.
Yeah, that we all expect. It just kind of felt inevitable even going into the tournament, regardless of what the models say. And I would say pretty much co-favorites. I would say I think that Canada, because of Jordan Binnington's play this season specifically, Jordan Binnington has been the worst goalie in the NHL in the regular season this year. That's just pretty hard to argue against from any statistical measure. And so because of that, the model is using NHL play from these guys to estimate their performance in this single game. And there's a lot of variables and factors that aren't considered. The betting markets would have, I think, Canada as a more significant favorite, but ours would have Canada and USA.
Yeah.
Pretty close, around 50 or 55% probably for Canada.
Sorry to interrupt you. So does that kind of point to, though, that a lot of it does come down to Binnington? That if Binnington can have one of these games, which he's kind of got the reputation for, right, that like shows up in the big moments, that if he can kind of match the what Hellebuck can do on the other side, then it's advantage Canada, but he is more likely to have that blow-up game at the worst time.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it comes down to. I think that the models probably miss a little bit of that nuance. It's probably even more oversimplified. The models, it's just, I think, more like Binnington is more likely to give up a goal than Hellebuck by a pretty significant amount. And so in these simulations, when you run these, right, there's some where the U.S. just dominates the game anyways, and they don't even need the goaltending. But as a whole, it's just one thing that kind of plays into these probability factors. So it's the same concept that you're saying, where Binnington has a pretty good chance to just have a blow-up game like he has for many of his games this season. The model might handle the nuances a little bit differently, but ultimately that really is it. Canada would be probably more strongly favored if they just had an average goalie in net, or if they had like Logan Thompson, they'd probably be more significantly favored. They definitely have the better skating and skaters, better play driving and whatnot. So it really does come down to goaltending, why they're close to one another, according to the model.
Patrick Bacon of HockeyStats.com with us. Some of the players that have broke out in these Olympics or kind of just ascended on the bigger stage, whether that's statistical or what you've seen. I know you mentioned you're a Sharks guy. Like, is Macklin Celebrini top of that list? Like, who else have you seen that is kind of raising their profile in the last week or two?
It seems like so there has been a lot of talk about Olympic Slavkovsky because he dominated back in 2022 before he was even drafted. So I'll give a shout out to Uri Slavkovsky. Another player that I think has really stood out, obviously near the top of the scoring list, is Martin Necas. Mm-hmm. He is, I think, so I'll ask this to you and maybe to those listening. Just, would you consider Martin Necas a star player in the NHL? Before the Olympics, if I'd ask you, is he an NHL star?
Fringe star at most, but I think probably most would probably say no, I would think.
Most would probably say no. Okay. So our model has him in the 86th percentile. A little bit higher than that on offense, but he's not the best defensively. Fringe star at best, right? Carolina traded him, part of the Rantanen trade, but Carolina, it felt like every other week somebody in the media was talking about how much Carolina brass hates Martin Necas, right? So he wasn't held in that highly of regard. But I think he was the Czechs' best player throughout the tournament. He led the Czechs in scoring, right? He's currently fourth in tournament scoring with 8 points. And I thought he was brilliant. Not his best game against Canada, but I really have felt like he's been brilliant throughout. So I think it's been a good coming out party for him. Dalibor Dvorsky on Slovakia, another one. Obviously, Macklin Celebrini, I could talk all day about him, right? I'm a Sharks fan. I saw his first goal live in person. He's amazing, but I think he was pretty well known. I look at Necas and Slavkovsky and maybe Dvorsky as guys who are getting a bit more traction around their names due to the Olympics.
Yeah, I think Celebrini, maybe this is, I'm sure, different in your sphere because he has been so good for San Jose this year. But him being out west, he's not on national TV all the time. That if you're someone in Buffalo or Boston, maybe Boston's different just because of where he went to school. But,
yeah.
Probably the wrong market to pick. But I think when he came in to the draft, great number one overall prospect, but at least I wasn't thinking of him as one of these generational guys, like a Matthews level guy at number one. And all year in the NHL, he's looked like that, and he certainly, I think, has doubled down on that in the Olympics. So, I feel like maybe his profile did raise a lot for those that aren't watching him, on a night-to-night basis.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it definitely stands out. If he finishes the season, I think it's fourth in points right now. If he finishes the season fourth in points, I think that people who kind of look at those points leaderboard and judge the West Coast players based off of that will start to give him his due. I do think I saw him, I think NHL.com did a poll for Hart Trophy ranking, and he was top 3. I definitely could see him getting Hart Trophy consideration if the Sharks make the playoffs, and I think that, especially with this kind of Olympic bump in his reputation, that becomes even more likely. But definitely it's been fun seeing people get to watch him and recognize him on the national stage. I think as a fan, one thing I'll say is the points are impressive and exciting. The one thing you don't realize about Macklin until you watch him play is just how tenacious he plays. He really is like a Crosby in that he's like a grinder, if you were to describe his play style. He's just a grinder who's going to score 100 points and lead your team to victory. But he plays like such a grinder. He's so strong in battles. He's not a big player, but I've loved watching him in the Olympics in his role.
One more guy on the Olympics, then we'll get to a little bit on the Sabres. This is kind of on the Sabres.
Absolutely.
Because Tage Thompson has been playing low-level 5-on-5 minutes for USA, and it's looked fine, but it's been more about power play for him. But what about Dahlin for this kind of point about, guys that are raising their level at the Olympics? It's maybe going to be tough for him to get a lot of attention for that because the team didn't perform, but man, he was looking like, to me, Sweden's best player for a lot of the tournament. And last year at the Four Nations was so different, Patrick, because they weren't really playing him a lot. And this year it looked totally different.
Yeah. I think that Dahlin, he did lead the Swedes in ice time, right? And he was the top scoring defenseman from them. So definitely the coaching staff agreed, and he got a lot of visibility. I think Dahlin's an interesting case because, as I recall, he was I think he wasn't a finalist, but I think he might have finished top 5 in Norris voting a couple of years ago. I think the hype around him was slightly higher a couple of years ago than this year. He's definitely considered, a top 5, top 10 defenseman in the league. But I think before the Sabres kind of turned things around, he was in trade talks, and it wasn't clear what the future would be for him. So it's definitely an encouraging tournament performance for him that probably went a little bit under the radar because Sweden didn't make it past the USA. But I think that he definitely is, one of the league's top defensemen, and it's easy to forget that when Buffalo is kind of treading water or struggling like they did last year. But no doubt, if people are sleeping on Dahlin, hopefully the Olympics did wake them back up because he is a stud.
Patrick Bacon, HockeyStats.com. So to the Sabres, they're going to restart here in 5 days. They'll be back in action, and they go into the break in a playoff spot with a 14-year playoff drought, the longest in NHL history. So for you right now, your site and what you see, how likely are they to make it? And really also at this point, how hard would it be for them to miss? How poorly do you feel like they would have to play to really be at risk of missing the playoffs?
Yeah. So first off, just first question, if there's one number to give, it's 88. 88% probability of the Sabres making the playoffs. And one more number to give is 6% probability of the Sabres winning the Stanley Cup, according to this model, which the model is notoriously bullish on the Sabres. It was bullish on them when they were out of a playoff spot to start the season, and a lot of people on Twitter really were, every time I'd post the playoff odds, people on Twitter would say, why is Buffalo so high? Why is Boston not higher than Buffalo, right? And so to your point, how poorly do they need to play to fall off the wagon? Right now, the cutoff in the Eastern Conference by points pace is 99, or 98 for the Metropolitan Division, but for the wild card spot, it's 99. So the Blue Jackets are on pace for 95. The Islanders are on pace for 98. And then there's a few teams at 89 to 91 who are kind of long shots there. So when you really look at this, there's 9 teams that have a solid chance, right? Columbus being the one that's kind of knocking on the door of that wild card spot, along with Boston. Right now, Buffalo kind of in that wild card mix, but also could jump into that division mix with Detroit and Montreal. They're in a great spot. It would likely take a collapse for them to miss. It would require a pretty bad drop-off from Buffalo, and then also kind of a jump from Columbus or like a miracle run from Ottawa. Ottawa's interesting because they've actually been a decent team outside of goaltending, but goaltending counts for winning games, and they haven't been great at that. Overall, I think the Sabres are a pretty safe pick to make it this year. I wouldn't sweat too hard about that if I were a Buffalo fan. But I can understand why Buffalo fans might sweat, just given how things have played out in the past.
Yeah, the number, I think, right, that everyone is first thinking about there is the 88% to make the playoffs. But when I'm looking, when I hear 6% to win the Cup, like, it's not that that's like a crazy high percentage at all. But, I mean, your site's got that third in the East. So, I don't know, like, if they do get in, I think maybe the question mark here with that, like, that I would have is, can their goalies hold up? Because all of them maybe are performing a little bit above what you'd expect this year. And will that continue into the playoffs where sometimes you need to have a hot goalie? So how do you see that? Like, do you think that needs to happen? Like, someone in that has got to keep it rolling for them to be one of these teams that maybe surprises and wins a round or two?
Yeah, goaltending is just such a fickle beast. It's funny. When you go into the numbers, right, when you're building these kind of models, just to give an idea on what happens under the hood, you're using past performance to project future performance. And you're looking at how have different components translated to future performance in the past, right? So you're looking at, year over year, how much is goaltending predictable? How much is goaltending repeatable? And the answer is it's really not that predictable. It's by far the hardest position in hockey to predict, right? We can all guarantee that Connor McDavid next year is going to be one of the best offensive players. Like, we know that for a fact. But we have years where a guy like Philip Grubauer will be a Vezina finalist one year, and then the worst goalie in the league in the Kraken's inaugural season, right? And so when building a model, what mine has ended up doing is putting a fairly low emphasis on goaltending as a whole. And that's why the model was always high on the Sabres. Early in the season, their underlying metrics were strong. They were scoring plenty. They just did not get the goaltending they needed. And so definitely goaltending is something that could blow them up. But on the flip side of that, we have seen teams with not established goaltending go far, right? We saw Vegas win the Stanley Cup with Adin Hill, who was their third-string goalie, who the previous season my Sharks had traded him for pennies because he wasn't good enough for them, a non-playoff team. And so goaltending is just such a fickle beast. It could definitely sink the Sabres. But at the same time, it could also sink, last year goaltending almost sunk the Winnipeg Jets, and they had a Hart Trophy winning goalie in net. So that's just the part that's the hardest to predict, and that's part of what makes playoff hockey so exciting, right? Goaltending could also sink the Avs, right? Mackenzie Blackwood could just turn into a pumpkin against whomever they play, and the Avs could win the President's Trophy and be out. So that's, I think, how I see things for the Sabres. I don't worry more about goaltending for the Sabres so much relative to other teams because I just worry about goaltending for everybody, if that makes sense.
Right. Patrick Bacon, hockeystats.com, 88%. They've got the Sabres to make the playoffs. They get rolling again in 5 days in the Olympics today. Thanks, Patrick, for joining, and maybe we'll do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, and appreciate everyone listening. And I'm on Twitter at Top Down Hockey. If anybody has further questions about the model or anything that was discussed, just feel free to reach out. I'm usually pretty responsive.
Definitely. By the way, last thing, are Red Wings fans the ones that are in your mentions the most right now? Because they're the team that I always see that you guys have low. Not that I disagree with it. Like, I watch them and I'm not impressed, but is that the fan base that's after you the most?
I think that's the one that Jay Fresh, who I work with, definitely seems to just butt heads with for whatever reason. I think I'm just going to take a quick look right now. It looks like the model says that the Red Wings are at a 50% chance to make the playoffs, which definitely feels low considering they're comfortably in a playoff spot right now. So I would give Red Wings fans the right to say, this guy's model is especially low on us, and I would give them the right to hate a little bit until I'm proven correct. Right.
Thanks, Patrick. Again, we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Hockeystats.com if you want to check out the site. And it's visually really easy to look at, and it's got all the odds there for you on everything from the point projections to the playoff odds, the Stanley Cup odds, and picking first overall odds, which is on there as well, live.